All right, well, this morning, if you have your Bibles, turn with us to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter number 2. The book of Ecclesiastes, chapter number 2. We'll examine a little bit of what Solomon, in his great wisdom, was able to sort of discern out of life. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, very, very interesting chapter, and we won't go through all of it, but the first 11 verses, Solomon basically talks about his life and how the process that he went of examining pretty much everything that this world had to offer. And he said he didn't withhold himself from anything. Verse number 9, he says he was great and he was increased beyond what anybody else that had ever been. Verse number 10, he says whatsoever his eyes had beholden, he partook in. So Solomon here, in the human experience, he goes in a very large direction. He built great things, and he conquered lands, and of course we know him as the wisest man that God had gave him an incredible amount of wisdom. And we'll see that applied here just a little bit in these verses today. So Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, we're going to start reading with verse number 12. We'll read down to the close of the chapter and examine these verses by the help of the Lord for just a little bit this morning. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse number 12. Here Solomon writes, and he says, "And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath been already done? Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in mine heart, this also is vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever, seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? As the fool. Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor, wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is in wisdom, and in knowledge, and in equity. Yet unto a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what hath man of all his labor, and all of the vexation of his heart, wherein he hath labored under the sun? For all his days are sorrows, and his travail grief. Yea, his heart taketh not rest in the night. This also is vanity. There is nothing better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather up and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit." As we come here to chapter number 2, Solomon, in his great discourse in the book of Ecclesiastes, begins to sort of give us an outline of all that he's experienced and all that he's done and all the things that he has seen, and sort of what was the end result of all that, and sort of what was the culmination of all these activities that he'd been to, and all these things that he had done. Now, for a lot of us, our lives vary, and we've got to do some different things in life, and maybe some of us have went places other people haven't been, and I knew people, and one older fellow I was talking to one time, he talked about his span of life was from Low Gap till about Pilot Mountain. That's the only places he'd ever been. And when I was reading this, I couldn't help but think about Clifford Horton, and all he ever wanted to do was just stay in Carroll County. He didn't really want to go anywhere. He liked being here. And then other people, they go different places and they see different things. And there are people that are world travelers, and they've been all over the globe, and they've done all this stuff, and they've accomplished all of these things. Well, here Solomon says, "Hey, there is nobody in this world that has ever done more than I have." And he begins to put all this together, and he begins to examine, he begins to reflect. The book of Ecclesiastes is a reflection on Solomon's life, and Solomon sits down and he begins to reflect on all of this stuff and all of these things and all of these things that he's done, all of these things that he's acquired, all these things that he's built, all these things that that has come in his life, and he begins to summarize all that here in the book of Ecclesiastes, and especially here in chapter number 2. And here's what Solomon come up with. I'm going to make a simple title. The things don't matter. That's what he come up with. That the stuff and the things don't matter. Now there are 5 things that I want you to notice in these verses today, and we'll traverse through them fairly quickly this morning. But there are 5 things that I want you to notice, and think about the thought, the things or stuff, if you want to use stuff or junk or whatever you want to do. Now, in my life, I have accumulated a lot of stuff, and most of it is junk. In the top of our storage building, there are things in there that I really need to throw away, but I just can't get myself to that point and get myself to that place. I have a stick in there. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm going to use it for something one day. It's just a stick. I don't know why it's in there, but I can't make myself throw it away. It's part of my stuff. Now I have a very impressive random nut, screw, and bolt collection that I have gathered over through the years, and most of these things it's just stuff and it's just junk. But Solomon here gives us a breakdown in chapter number 2 on the things or the stuff, the junk, whatever word you want to put in there. Insert random word there. Just doesn't matter. The first thing I want you to notice is in verse number 12 down through verse number 14, Solomon does a calculation of directions. Notice what he says here. He says, "And I turned myself." Now remember, in the first 11 verses, he talks about all the stuff that he's did and all the things that he's accomplished and all the things that he saw. He talks about that in the first 11 verses. He says, I didn't hold anything back. I lived my life to the fullest. So we see here, as we get into verse number 12, we see the calculation of directions. He says, "And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly." I turned myself and I thought about these things. "For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath been done, already done? Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all." Here's what Solomon says. He gives a calculation of direction. He's like, all right, I'm a wise man. But this is what he says. At the end of the day, I'm going to turn all my stuff over to somebody else. And he's thinking about his direction. And he talks about the wise man versus the fool. He says, "I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly." I thought about these things. I calculated these things. He said, this is what I found out, that wisdom excelleth folly. As light excelleth darkness, wisdom is a much better way to go. He said, I sat down and I thought about all this, and he's putting this standard together. He's calculating all this, and he says, hey, me being wise was to my benefit, and it's so much better than being a fool. Now, in general, we would all say that being wise is much better than being a fool. He says, my eyes, the wise man's eyes are in his head. He's looking forward. The fool is just wandering around in darkness. He doesn't really have much going on, and he doesn't really have much happening. He's just wandering around. And Solomon's thinking about all this and examining all this, and we probably have to some extent as well. He says the wise man's eyes, it's in his head. The fool's is in darkness. We see his calculation of direction. But in verse number 15, we see his correction of his discernment. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. Solomon said, this is what I thought. It's better to be wise than be a fool. He said, and then I began to think about this. Why, bad things happen to me just like it happens to everybody else. Even though I'm smarter than everybody else, and even though in my wisdom I find myself to be greater than everybody else, he says, this is what I found, that all this stuff that happens to those fools and all those things that are happening to them, here's what we got to understand. Wise people and rich people get sick too. They still have problems. In fact, rich people might have more problems than poor people sometimes. They have all that other stuff to worry about. We have smaller things that we have to worry about, not as much things. And Solomon here begins to correct his discernment. He begins to correct how he's thought about this. In verse number 12 through verse number 14, he calculates all this up and he says, all right, it's better to be wise than to be a fool. And he says, well, wait a minute. Then I said in my heart, it happens to the fool, so it happened even to me. And here's what we've got to understand. We are not immune to bad things happening to us in our lives. We're not immune to terrible things happening to us in our lives. We're going to get sick and we're going to have problems and we're going to have things that are going to go awry and things that are going to go wrong. Solomon is now, he's thinking about all this and he's putting all this together and he sort of, corrects his discernment a little bit. He's like, well, I said I'm better off being wise than being a fool, and then yet, I break my big toe just like the fool breaks his big toe. There's no difference. But he begins to talk about one very important aspect in verse number 16 through verse number 17. We see the calculation of direction in verse number 12 through verse 14. We see the correction of his discernment in verse number 15. But in verse number 16 and 17, I want you to notice this. Solomon talks about the certainty of death. He says, for there is no remembrance of the wise more than the fool forever. Seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten, and how dieth the wise man? As the fool. Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Solomon talks about the certainty of death. He sits down, he begins to think about this, and he says, people don't remember the wise man any more than they remember the fool. And he said, how does the wise man die? Exactly like the fool does. Now, he might get put in a better plot, he might have a nicer casket, and he might have a better suit of clothes that is on him. But here's what we got to do. If you go back and you go to a cemetery, if we went down here to the Hawk Cemetery and we dug up people that was there and they've been there 100 years, guess what? The clothes that they were buried in would not matter. The coffin that they were buried in would not matter. Whether their plot is nice and flat or maybe it's on a slope just a little bit, it wouldn't matter. It doesn't make any difference, because here's what we've got to understand. Whether you're wise or whether you're a fool, whether you're rich or whether you're poor, whether you're black or whether you're white, whatever it is that you are, here's what we've got to understand. There is a certainty for death that is coming for every single one of us, and nobody's going to escape, and nobody's going to get out of it, and nobody's going to be able, to make it go away. And there are plenty of things in life, man. A check makes things go away sometimes, and maybe a phone call and a favor makes things go away sometimes. But here's what we've got to understand. Every single one of us have an appointment with death. And you can't delay it. You can't make the phone call. You can't be like Audrey now. She don't go, I got a feeling in 2 weeks she might make a phone call and say, I can't make it today. I've got a bone in my toe and I've got an ingrown toenail. I don't have any shoes that match. My purse is too heavy. She's going to have some kind of excuse, maybe. We can delay appointments down here, right? There are appointments that we like and appointments we don't like. You ever, and I don't know why I hate it and I don't know why I do it, but I do this. I like to renew my tags in person. I like to go to the license plate agency and get my tag. I don't want to do it online. I want to go in person. And I don't know why I'm a glutton for punishment. Because that is one of the worst things that you can possibly do. I went the other day to get the plate or get the sticker for my truck, and fortunately there's one in Rural Hall, and I can go during lunch. And sometimes there's only 2 or 3 people there. Sometimes there are 2 or 3 people standing outside because that's how long the line is. But I like to get in that. I don't know why. I like to pay for it there in person. And death is sort of that way. You go when your number's called. And that person that renews my tag, they don't care where I live. They want me to tell them where I live. They don't care how big my house is. They don't care what I'm wearing. I went in there with different clothes on. They don't care about that at all. But when it's your turn, you go. And guess what's going to happen in this walk of life? When it's your turn, you're going to go. There's a certainty to it. The wise man dies just like the fool dies. Solomon has experienced all these things, and he's starting to think about that, and he's starting to process that, and he's starting to put all these things together, and he's starting to think about, all the things that he's done in his life. And when he gets down to the end there, he realizes this, that there is a certainty in death. We're equal in death. He says the wise man dies just like the fool does. He says we're exhausted in life. He says, therefore I hated life because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me. Solomon said, all this I've done, it's tiring. I had a list of things that I wanted to get done this weekend. And there was a few specific things that I wanted to get done over Labor Day weekend. I wanted to get the sidewalk and driveway pressure washed. So I went and I bought one of those surface cleaners that you hook to the pressure washer. And I'm going to tell you something, those things work great. The ones from Walmart work great for about 20 minutes. And then they don't work anymore. So then, I've got the spray that's about that wide, and I understand why Solomon said it's all vanity and vexation of spirit. Because here's what's going to happen. Next year, about this same time, you know what I'm going to be doing? I'm going to be pressure washing that same stupid driveway and that sidewalk, but without a Walmart thing. I'm not going to buy one from Walmart. I'm going to Harbor Freight. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a good one. Solomon said we do all this stuff, and what we end up with is just being tired. I wanted to wash the driveway and the sidewalk. I wanted to get the pool down. I had some things that I wanted to paint. I had to put some shelves up and convert a closet into a pantry. Well, I put shelves up. Vicky will convert it to the pantry, I guess. I put the shelves up so I shouldn't have to move the cans of fruit, right? So that's how that works. Everybody said amen right there. All right. Solomon said there's a certainty in death. He had a calculation in his direction. He said, man, it's much better being wise than it is a fool. Then he had a correction of his discernment. He says, now wait a minute. I'm going to leave all this stuff to somebody. And he began to talk about the certainty of death. Not only do we see the certainty of death in verse number 16, verse number 17, but we also see the conclusion of deeds in verse number 18 down through verse number 23. He says, yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. Solomon said, here's what I did. Here's the conclusion of his deeds. He talks about his labor in verse number 18 and verse number 19. He says, I hated my labor because this is what I've done. I'm going to leave it to somebody else. And he says, and who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool, yet shall he have rule over all my labor, and wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun, this also is vanity. Here's what Solomon said. He said, I went out and I made Israel a great kingdom. I went out and I made policies and I done things that was wonderful, and I done things that was great, and I went out and I labored and I worked, and Solomon was a great king, and Solomon of course applied his wisdom in good aspects, and Solomon went out and he made Israel the greatest nation that it could possibly be under the rule of Solomon. But guess who's coming? Jeroboam. We talked about Jeroboam a little bit Wednesday night in the book of Amos. Jeroboam takes the nation of Israel that was prosperous and great and flourishing and doing so good and put it right in the toilet. I'm not going to make any kind of parallels to today's time. You probably already have in your mind a little bit. I'm not going to make any parallels. I saw a little meme the other day that said, remember in The Lion King when Mufasa died and Scar took over and how things went? That's sort of what happened here in the book of, or that's what's going to happen post the book of Ecclesiastes. All of these great things that were done are gone. I think about My mom's neighbor, my mom and dad lived beside a sweet old couple, Zeno and Lena Easter, for years. And there was one thing that was always good about growing up there. Those were good folks. Man, they were very proper, and they liked things neat, and they liked things orderly, and they liked things to be as good as they possibly could be. And now that same property looks like Sanford and Son and Julio Fuentes has merged together and decided to make it junky. That's sort of what it looks like. That property that was nice and pristine and well organized and well taken care of is one generation removed from not looking like that anymore. And here's what Solomon said. There's a certainty of death, but there's also a conclusion of our deeds. When it's all said and done, all of these things that we do and all these things that we work on and all these houses that we build and all these cars that we buy and all this stuff that we acquire and all these things that we put together, here's what Solomon said. We're going to leave that to somebody else. And who knows what they're going to do with it? Who knows what's going to happen to it? Solomon said, I don't know if the man coming behind me, the man coming after me, is going to be a wise man or a fool. I don't know if this person is going to continue on in the right path. I don't know that this person is going to take Israel down a wrong road. He says, I don't have any idea. He says, but here's what happened. Because of that, he says, I hated my labor that I'd done under the sun. I hated all the things that I'd spent time on. He said, I'd done all this. I showed myself wise. I'd done all of these things. And the end of verse number 19, he says, this is vanity. We see the conclusion of deeds. We see his labor, but we also see his wisdom. Notice what else he says here in verse 20. He says, therefore, I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. For there's a man whose labor is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity, yet to a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and of a great evil. Somebody's going to inherit Solomon's kingdom. Somebody's going to take over after Solomon's gone. And they're going to inherit a great kingdom. And guess what they did to deserve that? They were just born. They didn't do anything special. Nothing. They didn't do anything special. They did absolutely nothing. And we live in a world now, and it's fascinating to me. We have, these people that are famous and they're socialites, and they've never accomplished anything. They don't know how to do anything. We've got people that are billionaires that wouldn't make it on second shift at Burger King. But they're billionaires. What did they do to deserve that? Absolutely, they were just born. They were just born, and all of this stuff that Solomon had accomplished, and all of these things that Solomon had done in all his wisdom, all these things that had been put in place, all of these things that were there before Solomon and are not going to be there after Solomon very long, all of these things, Solomon's going to hand that over to somebody else, and they're going to destroy it. We're talking about the conclusion of deeds. We see his labor, he says is vanity. We see his wisdom, he says is vanity. We see his time, he says is vanity. In verse 22 and verse 23, for what hath man of all his labor and the vexation of his heart wherein he hath labored under the sun? For all his days are sorrows, and his travail grief. Yea, his heart taketh not rest in the night. This also is vanity. Now there's something that I really don't like. And that's when I feel like I've wasted my time with something. If I feel like I've wasted my time because we have a certain block and we have a certain thing. I hate to redo something that I've done before because I didn't prepare properly and I didn't do it properly, and then I have to go back and rework it and go over it again and do that kind of stuff. It really troubles me to feel like I've wasted time. I'd almost rather waste money than time sometimes. Solomon says, I feel like I've just wasted time. I've just spun my wheels. I've went out and I've done all of these things, and here's what Solomon realizes finally. You can't get that time back. It's gone. It's gone forever. And there are times that I think about the times and things that I've wasted, and sometimes I thought, well, I could have used that time, just took a nap. How much better off would I been if I'd have just took a nap? We only have a certain amount of clicks that are on the clock, and here's what Solomon said: I spent spent a great majority of my time just wasting that time doing other things, and when we do that, this is what happens. We can't really focus on the things that are supremely important, and the things that we ought to be focusing on, and the things that we ought to be doing, and the things that we should be doing. I've done this. I haven't done it recently, but in the time past, I've taken a day off, and I've got a plan, and I've got something that I want to do, and I've got these tasks that I'm going to accomplish. And the next thing you know, it's like, I don't really want to get up just yet. I'll sleep in just a little bit. I might flip the TV on, and there's Wayne Brady, and let's make a deal, and that seems awful interesting. Let's just watch a little bit of that. And the next thing you know, the noon news has gone off. You're still in the bed. Anybody else done that? Amen. I've been there. Bought tickets and rode that ride. And this is what I feel after that. I feel guilty. I feel like, man, I've wasted this time because I know that I can't get it back. At the end of all, Solomon says in the first 11 verses, I went out and I tried everything. I experienced everything that my heart desired. I didn't withhold anything. And now Solomon's thinking about this, and he looks back and he says, you know what? There's a lot of things that I just wasted time on. And I'm afraid at the end of the day, when this is all said and done, when our life comes to a close, we're going to look back and say, you know what? I wasted labor, and I wasted my wisdom, and I wasted time. I wasted all these things. And Solomon says, hey, I thought there was a difference between the wise man and the fool. Turns out not so much. We see Solomon here talks about the conclusion of his deeds. And then in the last three verses, verse 24, 25, and 26, and we're closing with this, Solomon talks about the conviction of his decisions. He says, there's nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. For this also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. You know what? There are times in life that I've realized this. Of all the things that are out there in this world, and all the great things that we can experience, sometimes there's nothing better than just having some bacon. Sometimes just having some bacon is really, really good. Now, we can add other things to it, eggs and gravy biscuits and all of those other things. But if there was one thing in life that I would hate to do without, man, bacon would be really, really high on that list. Some of y'all might make it. Bacon might beat some of y'all out. I don't know. I'll have to put that list together. But bacon's going to be awful high. Simple things, right? Just sitting down and having breakfast. The simple things. Here's what Solomon is beginning to put together. We don't have to have the great things in life to be happy, right? We don't have to, go to Italy and go to Paris and go to all these places. Now, if you can, that's wonderful and that's great. But do you have to have that? You know what's great sometimes is just having the grandkids wake up and come wake you up. Layla spent the night, Friday night. We went to bed, I don't know, about 9:30. At about 10:30, she had coughed and coughed and coughed and about pushed me off the bed 2 or 3 times, and she finally woke me up, and Vicki said, go get some honey, and we give her a teaspoon of honey. It was thick. It was syrupy. She waited a few seconds. She threw up in the bed. I mean, it looked like honey and phlegm, and I don't know what else was in there. We didn't do any sort of tox screen or anything. Well, we get up, I go to the spare bedroom, and Vicki and Layla go to the couch. Layla gets on one end, Vicki's laying the other way, and I go in what we call Autumn's room. I get up Saturday morning, and I'm just laying there, I'm reading through some emails, checking weather and different things. And I hear Layla say this. She said, I'm going to go see if Papa's up. Now, if I hadn't have been, the next step would have been, I'm going to wake Papa up. That would have been step number 2. That's worth more than a new car. That's worth more than the stuff. Here's what Solomon says. We're talking about, the stuff don't matter. We're talking about his conviction of decisions. Notice what he says here in verse 24. There's nothing better for a man that he should eat and drink. Man, just to be able to enjoy that. That he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. Enjoy the good things that come out of it. This also I saw that it was from the hand of God. Here's what Solomon realized. That all that stuff that he had gathered up, it wasn't because Solomon was great. And it wasn't because of all these. Now Solomon was very wise and Solomon was a great man. I'm not saying that at all. But here's what Solomon began to realize. Hey, this isn't in me. This is what God has chosen to give and provide to me. These blessings that we have don't come because of, our intelligence. These blessings that we have don't come because, we work so much harder than anybody else. These blessings that we have don't come because our intelligence, far exceeds anybody else on the planet and we're so much better than anybody else. Here's what Solomon realized, that our blessings come always from the hand of God. This is where it comes from. This is why we have it. This is where we get it. We're talking about his decisions. Notice what he says in verse 25. He says, for who can eat or who else can hasten unto more than I? Solomon said, nobody's ate more than I have. Nobody has run around and done more than me. Who can do it? Who can do this more than I can? Sometimes in life, do you feel like you're absolutely overwhelmed and there's just not enough time in the day and the clock's always spinning and there's always something to do and Vicki made a bad practice right now. She started writing down all the projects that we need to do. If you have any spare notebooks, let me know after the service. Ours are all full, by the way. Now it's good to chronicle things. But you think about it, and I don't want to distract you too much, but when you leave here, think about all the things you got to do next week. And think about all the stuff that you didn't get done. Now, if you don't have enough, come see me. We've got some gravel that needs to be spread. We've got a shelf in the basement that needs to be cleaned off. What else was on the list? Oh, never mind. We don't even have a shelf, and we ain't even got a basement. I put things on the list that ain't even on the list. Good grief. Pre-Alzheimer's is rough. She's got a list of things, and they all need to be done. And guess what? As long as we're writing them down, there's always going to be a list. As long as we're writing them down, there's always something to do. Solomon says here, nobody's done more than I have. I know sometimes we think we're busy, but guess what? Everybody else is too. Verse 26, he wraps it up with this. We'll try to close with this verse. For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom, knowledge, and joy. God gives us wisdom, knowledge, joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail to gather and to heap up, and that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. Here's what God said. The sinner goes after the stuff. The good, God provides him all of these things. The sinner goes after the stuff. That's what they're interested in. They go after the things. For God giveth to a man that is good, what does he give him? He gives him wisdom, knowledge, joy. All this is done in the sight of God. God gives you the wisdom that you need. Sometimes in life you might think that you're inferior and maybe somebody else is smarter than you are. Here's what we got to understand. If you're following God, He'll give you the wisdom that you need. You're not dumber than anybody else. You're not smarter than anybody else. God will provide you the wisdom that you need. He'll give you knowledge. He'll give you joy. But notice what He gives to the sinner. He gives travail to gather and heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. Solomon sits down, and I hope this made a little bit of sense. Made better sense Friday than today. Solomon sits down, he says, hey, I tried it all. When it's all said and done, it's all vanity and vexation of spirit. And Solomon begins to realize that his heart should just follow God. and all will be taken care of. Let me read the last two verses of Ecclesiastes chapter number 12, two of my favorite verses in the Word of God. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, I've probably mentioned these before. Solomon says, like I said, Solomon is chronicling everything that he's done. He says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Here it is. Here's the whole duty. Fear God. Keep His commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. People have said and asked this question throughout the ages of time. What's my purpose? What do I need to be doing? What am I doing here? What's my purpose in life? Fear God, keep His commandments. Solomon says, I tried everything. And he breaks it down to these two very plain, simple principles. Fear God, keep His commandments. How do we get to the place where the stuff doesn't matter? How do we get to the place where the things don't matter? How do we get to the place that the junk don't matter? Fear God, keep His commandments. It all boils down to that. The rest of it is vanity and vexation of spirit. You buy a new car, somebody's going to ding it up. If you build a new house, somewhere along the line, the paint's going to start to fade. Somebody's going to ram something into the wall. Something's going to go wrong somewhere along the way. If I buy a new shirt, I guarantee you this, ranch dressing is going to be on it at some point in time in its life. Most of the time, after the first time that ranch dressing is in its presence. We made a great investment and got some of those Tide to Go sticks. There's one in the Explorer. There's one in my desk. There's one downstairs. I might even have one in my pocket. I don't know. I keep those things because something is always going to go wrong. How do we stop it? Fear God. Keep His commandments. Let's have our heads bowed, our eyes closed for just a moment. Miss Bailey would come and play softly for just a minute. I don't exactly know where you stand in life, but I know for myself, there are times where I put far too much importance on the stuff and on the things. There are times in life that my priorities get a little bit out of whack, and I focus on things that don't have eternal results, but have, temporary peace and satisfaction. I encourage you to do this today, friend. If there are times you feel like you're chasing the things of this world and forgetting about the things of God, bring it to this altar this morning and say, God, help me. God, help me to get my focus right. Where my focus goes, my energy goes. When I'm thinking right and my focus is right, I can do so much better than when I'm distracted and got 10,000 things on my mind and all the things that I got to do and all the things that I got to get done. And I need to go home today and write 2 papers, and I've got all this list of things that I need to accomplish. And if I focus on that, I'll get myself in a bad spot. But if I focus on the things of God, when I leave here today, my focus shouldn't be that next week I need to mow the yard, next week I want to go get a load of gravel, next week I want to do this. My focus when I leave this church today should be this: I've got to get ready for Wednesday night. That ought to be my number one focus. Fear God. Keep His commandments. If there's anything you need from this altar today, bring it to Him. Amen. I feel that's sufficient this morning. We appreciate you coming, being part of the service. Don't forget, we'll be back Wednesday night, continuing on with the second half of Amos chapter number 7. We got about halfway through chapter number 7 this past week. We'll try to finish off the